Hey crafty people, it's Tasha. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're making these two cards using a few simple techniques to give a soft, no line colour effect to the florals. Let's start with the two main floral bunches from Hero Arts' Cosmos and Lavender bunch stamp set. I'm adding both to my mini Misty with an A2 panel of Nina Solar White £80. I'm going to be die cutting these once I finish them, so I'm just fitting them in next to each other and picking them up on my Misty door. These are brand new stamps, so I'm just rubbing my hand over them to remove any residue left over from the manufacturing process. We want to get them to a matte finish, and that's going to help them take and transfer the ink much better and cleanly. For this technique, I'm going to be stamping each section on the images with the same ink colour that I'll use to colour them. This way, there's no harsh outline on any of my images. I'm masking off the stems on my lavender image with some low-tack tape. Now, you could totally stamp the image and fussy cut it to give you masks for each half, which, to be honest, would probably make it easier, but I didn't even think of it at the time. So I'm tearing the tape and carefully placing it to mask off all of the leaves and stems. Then I'm inking up the lavender with Amethyst Hero Arts core ink. I'm also adding some grape juice to the buds closest to the stem to give a little bit of contrast and some interest. That masking tape keeps the stems clear of any ink, and then once I've inked them up, I can remove the masking tape and stamp those florals down onto my panel. When you are stamping in several steps or layers like this, the most important thing to do is to make sure that your panel is pushed right down into that bottom left-hand corner. This way you know that every time you stamp, your image is going to be perfectly lined up. Check and push that panel every time you lift your Misty door. Obviously, if you want to, you can push it to the other corner, but this one's my preference. So I'm now masking off the florals to let me ink up the stems. I did give my stamp a quick clean to get any remaining purple ink off, because this is going to help the low-tack tape stay in place where I put it. I'm just working on small sections at a time, trimming wherever needed to make sure that I don't miss off any of the leaves or stems. And I'm inking up with green apple reactive ink, holding my mask in place where needed, and then I can remove it and stamp that second half of my image. Because I checked that my panel was pushed right down into that corner, I get perfect placement of that lower half of my image. Now, let's move on to the Cosmos bunch, and we'll try a second way to achieve the same look. I'm going straight in to ink up my flowers with raspberry jam core ink. Using one of these little cube ink pads means that I've got a little bit more control over where I place that ink, and I'm just using the corner of the ink pad to really get into those areas that I want inked up and avoid those areas that I don't. Then I'm taking a baby wipe on the end of my finger to clean up any of the edges, and I'll stamp this down. I did need to stamp this one a second time to even it up, so I just repeated the exact same steps. Moving on to the stems and leaves, I'm using green apple again and that same technique. Now, I did clean my stamp off screen because I don't want that raspberry jam to stain my green apple ink pad. Then when I stamp that down, I have the whole image. Is it perfect? Nope. But I know my recipient isn't going to be looking closely to make sure that I didn't catch any leaves with the raspberry jam ink. I'm also stamping a couple of the bows in root beer reactive ink so that I have one for each flower bundle, and I'm stamping it twice just to intensify that colour a little. Then this sweet little butterfly from the same set in passion flower core ink. For both of these, I'm just doing the whole image in that one colour. I've chosen 2 sentiments from the set and I'm stamping these down onto some more Nina Solar White in VersaFine Onyx Black, which is my preference for most everything that I want to stamp in black. Now let's colour those floral images. I'm taking the exact same ink colour that I stamped in and pressing it onto this old gift card that I'm kind of using as a makeshift palette. Then I've got a clear Wink of Stella pen. So this is a sparkly brush marker. It's got a water-based but archival ink with loads of gorgeous shimmer. You want to be sure you give it a really good shake every time you use it to make sure that that sparkle is thoroughly activated, because it will settle when the pen's not in use. So I'm just picking up some of that ink straight from the gift card with my brush marker and starting from the base of the petal, which would be the area with the most shadow, I'm painting that colour on. So brushing from the base out, following the line of the petal, which gives me a natural highlight to the tip of each petal. Using the Wink of Stella gives a gorgeous shimmer, and the ink formulation in it dries really fast, so I'm having no issues using it on this Nina £80, which is definitely not designed for wet mediums. You do need to be a little careful how much ink and shimmer comes out of your marker. That one petal on my Cosmos has kind of maxed out on sparkle because my marker had a little tiny burp of ink, and I did try to blot it up, but like I said, this stuff dries super quick and it's archival, so that is not budging now. Now, I don't want to add any sparkle to my leaves, so I'm swapping out that Wink of Stella marker for a Tombow ABT blender pen. This is another water-based marker, but it doesn't have any sparkle. So I've cleaned off my gift card and added some of the green apple reactive ink, and then I can just paint that onto the leaves. Then for the lavender buds, I'm going back in with the Wink of Stella, and these are super simple to colour. They don't take much ink at all. Now I'm going to die cut out everything. One thing I really love about the Hero Arts bundles is that you get the dies for the sentiments too. So I'm carefully selecting the right die and lining that up to perfectly cut my sentiment. I always like to do this, line it up, and use some low tack tape to hold the dies in place. And my favourite tape for this is the mint tape from scrapbook.com. It's got enough hold to stay in place where I put it, but I've never had it tear my cardstock. I cut a couple of extra pieces with those sentiment dies that I can layer up behind my sentiment. I also cut the flowers and all the other images, so I'll keep them safe until I'm ready for them by putting them all into this little pot. On to the backgrounds. I'm going to use a couple of my favourite bold prints together, starting with Novel Prose, which is probably my most used bold print. I'm using my original Misty, and for these mounted rubber stamps, you need to remove your mouse pad. Once I have that loaded onto my Misty, I'm adding another A2 panel of Nina Solar White and inking up my stamp with some Catherine Pooler Pebble ink, as I don't currently own any of the Hero Arts grey ones. Stamping that down and using my pressure tool to make sure I get even pressure across the whole panel, and I love the way that soft grey text looks. I did repeat that for another panel off screen. And now I'm loading up the Celestial bold print, and this one is so stunning. I'm going to stamp this over the top of the light grey text. So I'm inking up with a slightly darker ink. This one's called Hoodie, and I'm using my pressure tool again to get an even stamp. And how fabulous is that, with those 2 layers of stamping? I did the second one with the same Pebble ink that I'd stamped the Novel Prose in, just to give it a more subtle look. But surprisingly, I really think the darker one looks better. Which do you prefer? Let me know in the comments below. I'm adding my bow to the flower bunches, and I want to give the impression that the stems are longer than they actually are. So I'm gluing the bow and then cutting the bottom of the stems off. then I can glue this to the bottom of the bow and nobody would ever know that I did that, but it means that I can have more of that lavender on display and still have the bottom of the stems. Using my reverse action tweezers to hold the little bit in place whilst the glue dries. Now I want a little separation between that background and my flower bunches, so I'm going to use a piece of vellum. But I'm using these hole punch fancy edge dies to give an interesting edge. So I've got some A2 pieces of vellum from Pear Blossom Press. I'm going to line up the smaller circles die close to where I want the edge of this panel to be. I did then trim it down because I wanted to be able to fit in my mini die cutting machine. And after cutting it once, I'm shifting that back and repeating that to give me 3 rows of circles, all kind of offset. And I did a similar thing but with the square border dies for my other card. Now, when using vellum, it's important to hide your adhesive wherever possible because it's very visible through the vellum, and too much liquid adhesive will cause your vellum to wrinkle, and both of those things will really spoil the overall effect. So I'm popping up my bunches on foam adhesive directly onto where I want them to sit on my vellum. Then I can add glue behind that. So when I adhere that to my background panel, both the flowers and the vellum are adhered together. I want to make sure that the very edge of the vellum is adhered to avoid any accidents where it could be torn. Now normally I would fold the edge over to secure from the back, but with having the panels already cut to A2, I completely forgot that this is what I'd normally do. So I'm adding a single strip of adhesive right along that edge and hoping for the best that it won't be visible. Surprisingly, it's actually very subtle, and if you don't know it's there, I think it would be quite difficult to spot. My sentiment is already stacked with additional die cuts, so I can adhere this with liquid adhesive and then it straddles the edge of that vellum, which helps to adhere it as well. Some grey jewels from Alexandra Renke positioned round those floral bunches. I'm using my tweezers to position them and then pressing down to really activate that adhesive that's on the back of them. Lastly, those little butterflies on foam adhesive, and I'm using a black brush marker to colour in the body of each one. So that completes these 2 cards with a no line colouring effect, easily achievable with just a few simple techniques. Thank you for spending this time with me today, and if you aren't already subscribed, please do consider hitting that button. And please share this video with your crafty friends, that would mean so much to me. Have a lovely, happy, safe and wonderful week. Stay crafty. Bye.